Excuse me, give me the wrong sheet. We are not the Legislative Committee on Bills 332. Notwithstanding what the paper in front of me says, nous sommes le Subcommittee des droits internationaux de la personne du Comité permanent des affaires étrangères et du développement international. Aujourd'hui, notre séance 52, pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, we are looking into sexual assault on women and children during peacekeeping operations in fragile states and in situations of conflict. We are very fortunate to have with us today, by video conference from New York, Margaret Wallstrom, who is the Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations on Sexual Violence in Conflict. Ms. Wallstrom, our normal practice is to have you give your presentation, then we'll go to questions from the members, and I would invite you to begin whenever you wish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, honourable members of Parliament. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, although from a distance. Of course, I would have preferred to be there in person, but since I'm traveling a lot, it was not possible this time. So thank you for allowing me to participate through video conference. Would you allow me maybe to put this in a bigger picture? As I was presented, I'm the first one to hold this post, being the Secretary General's Special Representative on conflict-related sexual violence. And why are we talking about this? Well, I would say because of the changing nature of war. If we have traditionally thought of a war or conflict between two well-disciplined and well-trained armies on the battlefield over territory, this is no longer the common feature. Modern wars and conflicts are very often in failed states, or they are civil wars, they are intrastate, they are very often by armed groups, very difficult to control. And that has left women and children, that is civilians, have left them on the front line, not as soldiers armed, but as victims. And today, most of the victims are in fact civilians. So historically, this is a very important development to understand this phenomenon. And it is actually described since the Bible, or the stories about the Trojan Wars. We can read about virgins as a war prize. And it can seem that this is something inevitable, but it is not. And I think it is very important to understand that first and foremost. It has also been surrounded, it has been called history's greatest silence. and it is still surrounded by silence and I would say shame. And unfortunately, the shame falls on the victims, not the perpetrators. So this is important, and this is now being placed on the Security Council's agenda, because it is such a heavy impediment to building peace and building a sustainable peace. And that is because it undermines social security, it destroys families and societies. It also prevents women's participation in economic activities, and also very often prevents girls from going to school. And through impunity, also the trust in the construction of a country's judicial systems or justice systems, and countries or states' capability of protecting its citizens is also undermined through impunity. So it's a very, very serious phenomenon. We have seen it recently being used also as a political tool. That is to punish political opponents. And we've seen it in Kenya, we saw it in Guinea-Conakry, we are seeing it now in Côte d'Ivoire. This is also the reason why actually it was acknowledged already 10 years ago by Security Council Resolution 1325, which framed it Women, Peace and Security, giving women a particular role when it comes to war and peace building. And since then we've had a number of resolutions following up and also mentioning specifically sexual violence as a weapon of war or a tactic or a strategy of modern warfare. And so last year then the resolution that set up my post was adopted by the Security Council, and we had in December last year a resolution 1960 giving my team and myself access to the tools that we need. That is, Security Council said we are willing to use all the tools available to us, including sanctions, freezing assets, visa bans, all the tools that they have available to them to prevent rapists from having a career, political or military or civil career. And that is, of course, extremely important. I have set up, and I'll finish with that, I have set an agenda for myself with 5 points. I've said the number 1 is ending impunity. This has been met with almost total impunity and amnesty, actually, this type of crimes. We need to empower women, and that has to go hand in hand with fighting impunity. We have to create the political ownership of this issue, and that means both women and men. It's not solely a women's issue, it's a human rights issue. We have to rethink rape as a tactic of war, understand the phenomenon better, and we have to harmonize and coordinate better within the UN system, because today also a majority of the mandates for our peacekeeping missions contains a paragraph about protecting civilians. And civilians are men and women have their particular needs, and it has to be designed that way. So this is what we are doing now, and we have also identified 7 focus countries, because we believe that we have to engage more long-term and in a deeper way with a number of countries. 5 of them are in Africa, but this is not a cultural problem. It has also appeared in Europe, as we know from the war in the Balkans. So it means that also Bosnia-Herzegovina is one of our focus countries. So is Colombia. But the 5 countries in Africa are, of course, the DRC, the Congo. It's also Central African Republic, Côte d'Ivoire, Sudan, and Liberia as a post-conflict country, because this is also something that we need to follow up to see how it affects the country long term. So we are working full speed at the moment to make sure that this is also an advocacy task, to make sure that there is better knowledge and better awareness of this phenomenon. And you can be sure that it is also part of what is going on now in Northern Africa, unfortunately. And this will remain a very heavy impediment on restoring sustainable peace. And that's why I'm grateful for you and your committee that you have also put it on your agenda. I'll answer to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a reasonable amount of time here, so what I'd suggest, members, is that we go to, let's see, if we can get away with, I'll set the clock at 9 minutes for questions and answers, and then if we have a little bit of time left over, we'll see if anybody's got supplemental questions, and we might have time to do 1 or 2 questions for those who've had particular issues raised by the first round. So with that in mind, Mr. Silva, would you like to begin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to first of all thank the Special Representative to the Secretary General. I had an opportunity to actually look at some of the recommendations that you had put forward, and I had suggested your name to be as a witness to this committee, so I'm glad that you are here before this committee, this very important debate that we're having to have a report on the issue of sexual assault on women and children during peacekeeping operations in fragile states and in situations of conflict. Now, I think you set it out correctly at the beginning by talking about the fact that the changing nature of war, where it's now affecting civilians, not soldiers any longer, like it was in historical times. And you had listed 5 countries, specifically in Africa, that where post-conflict rebuilding is taking place. I want to know from you, and maybe you can give us an assessment what is happening underground, whether things are improving or not improving. I'm also concerned about the relationship between sexual violence and internally displaced persons in some of the camps, and what the UN is doing, in fact, to deal with that issue. So if you could give us analysis of what are some of the initiatives that are taking place, and whether you have seen progress or whether it's not having much of an impact, some of the initiatives that have been taking place by not just the UN but also Western countries.
Thank you. Do you want me to come in and respond
yes,
directly?
Please. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Silva, for that question. Are things improving or not? I don't think we are capable of answering in an assertive way to that question, because we are only now starting to sort of monitoring and reporting on this particular phenomenon. It comes with war and conflict, of course, and when I have visited the Democratic Republic of Congo, women keep repeating, if it were not for the war. They see that also the things that have come, and this is what we've seen from Liberia, a phenomenon that has been introduced during a war or conflict situation, like gang rapes or very, very brutal sexual violence. Unfortunately, that stays in the society also after the guns have fallen silent, like in Liberia. They see that assaults on children and gang rape, which was unknown before the war, is still a crime that is, and rape is the #1 reported crime still there. So it affects society in a very deep way. So I think that where you have active conflicts, this is still being used, and I think that the new phenomenon is also that it has been used to punish, I mean, in the political context. So in connection with elections, and also like in Angola, with the expulsions of illegal migrants, then you have seen it also as a phenomenon. And this is why I don't think anybody can give you a really clear answer whether it is improving or not. We are hoping that the level of attention to this, the fact that the media is reporting the fact that there is more of a political will help us to improve the situation. And I think impunity is core to all of this. If it continues with almost total impunity, that there are no risks involved in doing this to women, then I don't think we will be able to tackle it properly. With camps and the problems of IDPs, we made an inventory actually to look at what are the best peacekeeping practices, because a lot has been done sort of ad hoc and on the ground in a number of countries, and we put that together in an inventory presented last year, and now we're following up with the training of peacekeepers to make sure that they can do a better protection of civilians using these methods. And that's everything from having joint protection teams, engaging with civil society, having more fuel-efficient stoves so that women don't have to walk so far away to get firewood or water. They accompany them to the market or to the water well, and that has also been proven to be effective. And of course, in the whole design of camp areas, this is also very important. Women need particular protection. They need to have maybe separate showers. They need to have all their needs met, and that I think is being done sort of step by step, and a better understanding of those needs. But it is not at all perfect, as we've seen from Haiti, for example, where this continues to be a huge challenge and a lot of problems with sexual harassment and rapes.
A brief question before I turn over to Professor Erwin Kotler, but you do have an obligation and also responsibility to, in fact, to call out those who are, in fact, are committing these types of atrocities, including leaders of certain countries, because we talked a great deal about impunity, which I agree with you totally, but we can't allow these people to get away with it. So as a special advisor, I think you have a responsibility, I believe, to, in fact, call out those people who are, in fact, committing these particular crimes, right?
Well, exactly. This is what I got by Resolution 1960, adopted in December by the Security Council. I now have that tool available to me, that I can name and shame them. We can list them. We can engage with different armed groups in order to get commitments from them so that they can avoid being listed, and also including sanctions. But until now, this was only done actually for those who committed sexual violence against children. So there was a very artificial divide between children and grown-ups, and this we got rid of by Resolution 1960. So now we are engaging in making sure we have a monitoring and reporting system, and that we can only do we can also do the listing and the naming and shaming. That's correct.
Unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left in this round.
I'll be very brief,
okay.
And I'll deal exactly with this point because I appreciate the importance you gave to combating impunity. Your reference in that regard to the listing mechanism, UN Security Council Resolution 1960. And I know that Sudan is one of your 2 priority countries, and my question has to do, given that the vote has been for independence in southern Sudan, as part of that, there's been talk about waiving the indictment against President al-Bashir or another one of the Sudanese leaders, Ahmed Haroun, who've been indicted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. In other words, in order to further good relations between North and the South, we should waive or ignore these indictments. What is your view of that? Or would you regard waiving such indictments as really being, in fact, defaulting on the struggle against impunity?
I mean, I trust a lot the work of the ICC. I think it's extremely important that we can work with the criminal court in The Hague, and I have already. I am already cooperating with the ICC, and of course they are calling for Mr. Bashir. So I would trust them on this, and I think it is unfortunate if they are sort of let off the hook. I wouldn't personally like to see that. I think it's very important that in all the cases that is in front of the ICC at the moment, this is one of the elements that they are accused of, including Jean-Pierre Bemba, including Mr. Bashir. And it's very important to follow up and follow it through also legally. So to me, again, fighting impunity is core to any success on this issue.
Thank you, and I appreciate your commitment in this regard.
We should have time for, if we stay on our schedule, for an additional question or two. Perhaps we can return to you then, Professor. Madame Deschamps, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais m'adresser à...
Thank you. I will ask my question in French. And first of all, I would like to thank you for being with us here today to speak about your work. This is a relatively new position that was created last year, and you mentioned this in your opening remarks, and you informed us also of the resolution 1960, which gave you the tools to list and to name perpetrators, and you also mentioned your 5 objectives. I would like to know how, in order to achieve your objectives, how you are working, or you can coordinate your work and your efforts related to the presence of civil society organizations in these organizations, and how can you have some influence on the government. At the beginning of the week, we had a representative from an NGO who was working in Sudan with women, working on the situation of women to try to change the legislation which does not recognize rape and sexual assaults against women as being criminal acts. And it's very difficult for them because they have very little access to the government. They're working with civil society, with women in the north, women in the south, but it's very difficult for them to put any pressure on the government. So what would be your role with these women? And you also mentioned that you are working, you mentioned 7 countries, 5 African countries, and when we're talking about countries in conflict, countries that have been affected, for example, the case of Haiti, how are you working with women in Haiti, particularly those who are in camps and where it appears there's a great deal of violence against women? Thank you, Madam, for your question.
Well, we'll have 9 people in total in my team, and of course we are working politically. We are working within the UN system to influence everything from how mandates are formulated to how our peacekeepers are working on the ground. So it's really a very political role, and this is also, as you might know, my background. I would say that it is my obligation to engage with governments, so I always I aim for the highest level. I try to meet with presidents, with prime ministers, with government ministers to mobilize them and to work concretely with them on these issues. And for example, last time visiting the DRC, I managed to get a long meeting with the President Kabila, and this is extremely important that we create a political accountability and ownership of this issue. But without the work of NGOs, civil society organizations, we wouldn't know that much about this whole issue. So we are dependent on, and we are indeed very encouraged by the work that NGOs and civil society organizations are doing. And they are also helping us to report about what happens on the ground. I agree with you that, of course, the situation in Sudan is extremely difficult, and as we learned from meeting with Sudanese government representatives here, they underline that they take rape so seriously that actually 4 male witnesses are needed in order to report a rape, which of course means that no rapes will be reported, because you won't have, very rarely will you have 4 witnesses that will report on such a crime. You are also correct in describing the challenges on Haiti, and of course this means that we are in a situation where we have to decide how to engage, because it is not really a conflict-related situation for me and my team, but the whole UN system is also here engaged in finding solutions, and also engaging with donor countries and others who are, and the organizations that are active on the ground, to see how they can prevent sexual violence and rapes from happening. And I think that includes a lot of solutions, from patrolling during night to make sure that also in the camps that they are let in there, to have more of policing and monitoring of the situation and the possibility to intervene. But here there are more of these actually civil sort of criminal elements that are also raping women and children in Haiti. But for me and my team, this is not sort of a given priority country, as you could hear. But of course, we are keeping an eye on and trying to collect as much of information as possible from all areas in the world where sexual violence is used.
Je reviendrai plus tard, Monsieur le Président.
Okay.
We'll come back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam, I want to commend you for taking up the challenge of this particular problem. When you've decided to help confront this horrendous crime against human dignity, the task today is quite huge, quite daunting. I'm also pleased, though, to hear from you that you have a number of tools at your disposal that have not been there in the past. But I'm of the opinion that when you look at the countries that you've named, that historically those countries have been in conflict for generations now. And what's very troubling for me is that it seems to be quite clear that the institutional memory of those countries now are starting to accept the fact that sexual assault is somehow acceptable in itself, both during the conflicts and after the conflicts. And in the context of where we are in the world right now at this point in time, when we see the situation that's happening in Libya, I'm heartened in a way, because part of what's purported to be coming to the fore in the situation in Libya via the United Nations is a sense of the responsibility to protect innocent non-combatant citizens. I'm wondering if you see that sense of responsibility spreading into the area of sexual assault, first of all, and in country where this is so part of the culture at this point, or appears to be. Are there religious organizations in those countries that have taken a stand against this practice, or are they somehow condoning it? Thank you.
These are two very relevant and important questions. Has sexual violence become sort of accepted also in post-conflict situations? Well, certainly it has sort of lived on also in post-conflict situations and in those countries that have experienced long civil wars. This has affected those societies deeply. And of course, it will never be the same in a country where so many young people have been recruited as child soldiers, for example, and maybe have had to, in front of their families and their villages, they had to rape a family member, maybe a mother or a sister, and then kill them or do something other violent acts against their family members. This lives on for generations. And on the other hand, it is also important to see progress, because now actually the Security Council decided that this is part of the peace and security agenda. This is something that they want. They are willing to use all their weaponry to fight it. That we've had these resolutions also pointing to solutions, that we are formulating protection of civilians in almost all the new mandates for peacekeepers. We are training peacekeepers. We are doing so much more in recognizing this as a plague and something that we have to deal with. So I think you have both, but it has to do with the role of women and the respect of human rights. And this is important to see, that it is not, as I said before, not solely a women's issue. It's a human rights issue. It is not cultural. It is not even sexual. It's criminal. And that is how we have to treat it. You are also right in acknowledging that the role of, for example, religious leaders, and I can see that they are engaging more and more, and that we are also able to mobilize more men in the fight against sexual violence. But so far, this has been very problematic, because women carry the shame and the stigma of having been victims to sexual violence. So very often they are not allowed back into their families or their communities, and they are extremely traumatized by this. So we are trying also to reach out to religious leaders, to community or village leaders, to discuss with them what they can do to sort of see this, to deal with the problem of stigma. We are maybe not that successful yet in doing so, but we are continuing to target also religious organizations, because in many of those countries they play a pivotal role.
Well, thank you. In this committee, I guess it's a year and a half ago now, did a study on the case of Omar Khadr, who was a child combatant. I'm sure you're aware of the case. And we heard at that time testimony about the kinds of things that were forced upon child soldiers, and particularly many that had been in Africa, Sierra Leone, and places of that nature. And so you can understand the end of the situation where you have the victims of the sexual assault who have post-traumatic stress and all the complications of that mentally, plus the societal problems they face. And in addition, the perpetrators of this are also facing a horrendous guilt at some point in their lives, as at some point they will address this in their own lives. But I believe until society as a whole in these countries accepts the responsibility of not only stopping that sexual assault and deeming it to be the horrendous crime that it is in their own society, but also come to terms with coming together in a fashion where they can address both the victims and the perpetrators. There's a very difficult situation to make change, and it sounds to me like there's a horrendous need for on-the-ground education and understanding.
This is a huge challenge to the international community and also to donor countries because, for example, in Liberia, they don't have even one psychiatrist in the whole of the country. And dealing with that trauma from a very long civil war, one can understand the needs to do psychosocial counseling, etc. They don't have any forensic expertise. And this is what they have asked us to maybe look into and see if we can assist, if we can mobilize donors and others to look into that and how to help them. And I would say that it is also important to learn from this in the post-conflict situation, that we have to acknowledge this as a phenomenon that needs to be dealt with. So maybe we are moving too quickly sometimes into development only, saying, all right, now the war is over and we just have to go on as if everything has been taken care of. But we have to look into the psychosocial needs of the population, and in particular, of course, child soldiers and the traumas that have been experienced by the population. So I can only agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're starting with Mr. Sweet, and then we'll go to Mr. Hebert.
Okay.
So.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Madam Wallström. I've got two quick questions, and my colleague has some questions. But the first one was in regards to Mr. Kotler's concern with impunity. The subject came up about naming and shaming the perpetrators, and I'm just wondering what level of mandate that you have. Do we name the countries where the impunity is happening? Do you have a mandate to name the political parties? You'd mentioned that it was used by political parties to punish those who would run against them. To what level can you actually name as you gather evidence?
That's a good question, but the mandate given to us in the resolution 1960 from December is naming and shaming, as has been done for this type of crimes committed against underage, that is sexual violence against children, and that is on individuals and also on armed groups or militias or armies. So those are the ones that we target. So we can mention, and this has already been done. For example, the 5 famous or infamous mentioned on the blacklist from the DRC. So those are individuals, but we can also engage with armed groups, including national armies.
So you could name a captain or a lieutenant or a general who was that you found evidence was actually commissioning their troops to do such a thing. Do you have such a list right now?
We are working, of course, on our list, but this has been done already when it comes to sexual violence against children. So we have experience from working with those types of lists. And
okay.
Of course, we need to first establish a monitoring and reporting system so that we have
okay.
reliable data. Because until now we have not had that. But this is exactly the task and the mandate we've been given from December, so we're working on that at the moment. What has been promising is that also in the DRC, they have actually put commanders, because until now it has been easy maybe to sort of deal with a foot soldier or a normal soldier, but we want to go for the commanders. The higher up, the better in the chain of command. And this is how it has to work to address impunity.
So that's presently in process right now. And just so you know that no matter where we're at in this study or in the future, that any time that you gather names on that list, this committee would be glad to accept them, the clerk of the committee would be glad to accept them, and we would act upon that post haste. I'm certain I could have agreement with all my colleagues in that regard. You had mentioned about peacekeeping best practices, and I'd already made a list of things that I wanted to find out about. Do you have a model? I understand that if you go into an area where there's already been devastation, whether it's natural devastation or whether it's caused by human conflict, where you set up these camps for displaced people, is there actually a model where you've determined how many security do you need per person, medical aid, food distribution, education, hygiene, or is that one of the items you're also working on as far as best practices to make sure that those camps create the best atmosphere to reintegrate those people and keep them safe?
Well, as you know, also in the UN, we are very sort of specialized. So there are, of course, those who work on IDPs and on these camps and the design of these camps. And I think this is still developing. This is not so much my sort of direct task, but of course we are looking into this being used, the phenomenon of sexual violence also being used in connection with, for example, expulsions of people or in and around these camps. But it's the peacekeepers and those who work with designing those camps that also have to address this. And the rest we are trying to look into. I mean, the situation is the following. Many of these peacekeepers, for example, come from India, they come from South Africa, from Uganda, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, and they are placed out there in the jungle of the DRC. They don't speak any of the languages, the local languages. And suddenly this half-naked woman comes up on the dirt road, and she comes up to their vehicle, and she apparently cries for help. What are they supposed to do in a situation like that? They don't understand what she's saying, and she seems to need help. They know that if they take her on the vehicle, they might themselves be accused of sexual exploitation and abuse. So there is a risk to that as well. You know, there's been a very lively debate about peacekeepers also going to prostitutes or being accused of sexual violence. And they cannot leave her there. They understand that this is a risky situation. This is exactly the kind of training we are doing now, scenario-based training from real examples from the ground, trying to help them to deal with those different situations, including also, of course, for us to work with those that design those camps. Or when we visited Angola, we discussed with the people there what is going on in connection with the people being expelled. Is it that the chain of command does not work, in that this is prohibited, that the police and the border control allows this to happen, maybe around the chaos that exists in many of those situations? Then you have to make sure that it works, that the whole chain of command works, and that impunity is not the rule. So we have to address it on parallel tracks and at the same time and in an effective way. But my direct task is not exactly these camps maybe, but this is definitely for the UN. This has to be part of how they think and design also for camps. And I'm sure that there are these calculations, how many people are needed, how much of this or that service is needed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, what's the attitude of the local governments in the DRC or Angola? Are they complicit? Do they have an attitude of concern? Is there legislation on their books that could be used to, if enforced, prevent this sort of activity?
In most of these countries, there is already a normative framework that is good enough, you could say, that there is, you know, they very often have an ambitious legislation against rape. They have the laws and the rules are there, but it's a matter of the implementation. And unfortunately in the DRC, and as you might know, they were not happy with me actually repeating the notion of the DRC, the rape capital of the world. I did not coin the phrase, but I said as long as they allow this to continue, their reputation will be taken hostage by the rapists and by these armed groups that use sexual violence as a tactic of war. And it's very important that they themselves show that they are serious about fighting impunity, that they actually arrest these commanders also. So I think that it has maybe been lax until now, the whole attitude also from governments and ministers. But I think we are seeing progress. We are seeing that we can mobilize them, and that there is more of an accountability, and that this has become a liability also for the governments, that the international community is reporting on it, is following up, that the Security Council is discussing it, that there are sanctions committees in the UN dealing with it, that there are these naming and lists with naming and shaming. This is extremely important. But there are also, I mean, in Angola, they were very clear and very much on the defensive. They said, no, this is not at all systematic. We have found one case of a policeman who has a police officer who has done this. We have arrested him, put him in jail, and so on. But so the attitude can be a little bit different, but they have to show that they are serious by addressing exactly these problems of impunity, and also the role of women, because they have to give women a voice, they have to give women influence if this is to be changed over time.
All right, that uses up the available time, Mr. Hebert. I did just ask around about people who want to do further questions. Madame Deschamps indicated a desire to ask one more. I'll just mention as well that, Mr. Marsden as well, okay, I'm going to try to leave enough time at the end. We'll ask, we'll finish up with Ms. Wallström, and then we've got a motion that Mr. Silva had wanted to bring before us. So let me now turn to Madame Deschamps. Okay. Let's make these 4-minute rounds.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de me rattraper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to give me another chance to ask a brief question. Additional question. I would have been disappointed if I could not ask that question. With Resolution 1325, the Canadian government has proposed a plan of action recently, a few months ago. Have you had the opportunity to learn about the plan of action of Canada relating to Resolution 1325?
Thank you very much for that question. It's an opportunity for me to say that, of course, I hope that other countries will follow the example of having the national action plans as the implementation or the follow-up to Resolution 1325. I have to be very honest to you and say that I don't know your national action plan by heart, but I know from contacts with Canadians here in New York and everywhere where I have been that you've been extremely helpful, and that I have felt the support and the backing of Canada in everything I do. So also in the Security Council setting and in around New York and through my political contacts, I must say that I have felt throughout support of Canada and your government. So that has been very, very important. Thank you.
But apart from the action plan, do you believe that Canada could do more on an international basis for that?
That's an invitation for me to say that I always think that member states can do even more. I think the elements of 1325 are very good. You know, participation of women. I think in particular participation of women, a representation of women is an extremely important part of it, and we can always do more on prevention. We will always, of course, need more resources, I guess, to the work that is being done in practice and on the ground. And I think to integrate this whole thinking about sexual violence is extremely important. So maybe to mention it explicitly also, if possible. So in any review of national action plans, I think this is what can be done. Yeah, and I think also more women, for example, one of the things that we have seen is extremely important is more women police, more women peacekeepers. And I would add one more element that I did not mention in my introduction, and that is the whole issue of conflict minerals. Because, for example, in the DRC, the extraction of, for example, coltan or tungsten or these rare minerals that are used in our mobile phones is something that is keeping that conflict alive and will continue to fuel the conflict. And unfortunately, the poor people in the DRC, nothing gets back to them from the extraction of these conflict minerals. And it's important to be able to trace it and hopefully one day be able to establish a kind of a global regime like the one that exists for diamonds, in order to be effective to fight also sexual violence.
Okay. Alors peut-être
So, perhaps in conclusion, we could say that in order for you to achieve your objectives, and we have to be realistic also, but basically we have to increase funding and perhaps ensure long-term funding to make sure that those objectives can be reached. Would you agree with that?
Well, I hope, of course, that what we do will be long-term, that we can keep these issues on the agenda of the Security Council, that it will continue to be identified as a peace and security issue. And I think it's more for member states to also decide in their bilateral programs, in their aid programs, how is this being addressed? Is this a particular explicit mentioning of sexual violence? That could be a way forward. But, you know, I would need to study your national action plan. I'm afraid I did not have time to do that before today to be able to comment on your specific action plan. But I hope we have placed this on the radar of member states and governments when they now look at also national action plans.
Mr. Marsden?
I'll try to be very to the point. What I was going to ask you, Madame, is just pretty much did is whether there's a specific ask of the Government of Canada that this committee might present, that you might offer to us. You may be aware that the bill that we had, Bill 300, failed in our Parliament recently, calling on Canadian mining companies in foreign countries to observe the same rules and regulations they would in this country. I'm telling you right now that in the next Parliament, we're about to go into election. Should I be elected, I intend to put that bill back in again to make another effort, particularly in the area of conflict minerals. So, knowing that this committee is probably going to be dissolving within about 48 hours, and the past history of our committee, that once we return to Parliament to look back at the studies we've done and resurrect certain studies, I would believe that we would want to resurrect this particular study. So if in the meantime something comes to your mind that you would like to ask this committee to consider to add to the report, please let us know. But I don't have a specific question.
Okay. And I believe, Mr. Sweet, you'd wanted to...
Yes, I do, Madam Wallström. I just have one more follow-up question. In regards to the immediate damage to children as well as the long-term repercussions, what's the difference as far as sexual violence is perpetrated upon them? How does it differ between, how do the repercussions differ between the, children and adults?
The last question is also a very, very important one, and maybe not so. I have to think so that I can answer to it in a serious and correct way. Of course, it depends on circumstances, but very often a child's, and especially young girls, of course, their life opportunities are hampered by being exposed to something like this. Very often, you know, they cannot go to school. Very often, maybe they cannot bear children, and that, of course, affects their whole lives. At the same time, it's important that this is looked upon as a crime that is committed also not only against children but also to adult women, and that it is not played down. And I call it this false hierarchy of war horrors, that it is compared and they say, well, you know, men get tortured or killed, so what is a rape? But you have to understand the effects also on an adult woman. And of course, a child's whole future can be determined and be destroyed by being exposed to rape, and very often violent and brutal rapes, or being taken as a child soldier. But also an adult woman, and I met with grandmothers in the DRC, and that was absolutely horrific. And they said, we pleaded to this young man, we said, you're the same age as my own grandchildren, you could be my grandchildren, why are you doing this to a woman like myself? I did not think that I would have to go through this as a 70-year-old woman. And it takes away the self-respect and also the shame that surrounds this. It's so awful. And of course, women are very often the economic backbone of their societies as well. And after this, they are depressed very often. They get physical problems, medical problems, and very often also they got fistula problems. So it's difficult for them to bear more children. So there are all these effects on both children and adult women. So we have the whole range of effects. I think, can I go back also to the other issue? I understand I have to tread carefully here in the politically sensitive situation that you are in, so that I don't take sides here in a way that would that would put me in trouble. But let me say that I really hope that other countries will follow the example of the United States of America, because as you know, in their financial reform package, they passed a resolution, legislation on conflict minerals. And I'm not saying that this is perfect, and they are sort of in the process of implementing it now, but I think to be effective, it needs to be a global regime. And I really encourage all member states, I encourage the European Union as well as your country to look into conflict minerals and how to trace it, and maybe even get to a certification process, but to start and maybe to follow a kind of model that has already will be introduced by the US. And I think it will be very, very important for this whole issue to be solved.
What's that? Yeah, very, very briefly, Mr. Sweet.
Just one last question on the sexual violence towards young people, children, youth and children will include in that. We had testimony from Afghanistan about a practice that was done with young boys, boy dancing, I believe it was, and the additional traumatic thing about that was it meant that the boy was actually enslaved for a time. And do you find those kinds of things happening in these focus countries you're talking about, where there's long-term enslavement and of young people, and repeatedly they're subject to this sexual violence?
Yes, unfortunately, this is the experience also from these countries. The LRA also very often takes sort of sex slaves, and it's important what you're saying, that this is being done to both men and boys as well as women. It's useless to try to compare their suffering, but the stigma is also enormously strong, of course, for boys and men. Very often they hesitate to admit that this has happened to them. And I listened to one of the witnesses in the panel on reparations that was done in the DRC, and one of the men said, I had no idea that this could be done also to men when it was done to me. And it was clearly how traumatic it had been for him as well. So I think maybe also to be able to get more men on board in the fight against sexual violence, that when we mention that this is done also to young boys and men, that we can have more of political ownership also from men. So thank you for mentioning that. This is done actually also in the form of a kind of sexual slavery. They are often forced to follow an armed group for a long time, and not. I mean, it's not unusual that they are also killed afterwards, just left in the forest.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Wallström. We very much appreciate your making your time available to us today. It was very, very helpful. So thank you. And I guess at this point, we'll wrap up this part of the hearing.
Thank you very much, honourable members.
Yes. For the rest of the committee, we have a motion that Mr. Silva had put forward. Can we turn to that now?
Yes, that pursuant to standing orders, everybody's okay with the motion? Yeah.
We've agreed.
Could the motion be also be made public?
Yes, we'll put out a press release with the motion.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I very quickly turn? This is likely to be our last meeting of this Parliament. There seems a high probability of that. So, in an elegiacal tone, let me take a moment, first of all, to say thank you. Merci à tous les membres du comité. Vous êtes.
Thank you to all members of the committee. It's been a great pleasure to work with you all in this group in a very nonpartisan way. That's the exception in this Parliament, and I would like to thank all of you.
Thank the other folks. We, of course, are used to, as MPs, getting lots of credit for stuff, whether we deserve it or not. But the translators and technical personnel here don't get that chance, and we very much appreciate the fact that they run everything in a very competent manner, unsung. So we appreciate that. I see Mr. Hebert about to applaud, so yes. And likewise, our analysts. We have two excellent analysts with us. I get to work with them all the time, and Melissa Radford and Erin Shaw are really fantastic. Finally, we've gone through a number of clerks in the last little while, all of them very, very good. I wanted to thank Julie Prudhomme, who was our first clerk in this Parliament, Julie Pelletier, and finally Marianne Baudin, for their outstanding service, even by the high standards of the clerking and Library of Parliament services we expect here in Parliament. I think they've all performed outstandingly, and I wanted to thank them. And we are adjourned.
Well, thanks for that. Very nice.